Blessings, everyone. This is Reverend Aphren with the Four Pillars Proto Temple. So I'm coming to you today because I want to talk about spiritual and magical keys. And I was inspired to do this video like I am with most things, going out and spending time in nature. And I was going to do this video out there, but then it started to get dark and the mosquitoes started to come out. So I thought I would come back inside and do the video here. So what exactly is a magical or spiritual key? When we, in our tradition, refer to the term key, it's almost like a cue. It's a trigger of some sort that basically tells your mind on a psycho-spiritual level that you are doing something magical or you're doing something spiritual. And there are a lot of different keys that are used throughout the world. I think that in our faith we have a lot more because there's so many correspondence that we understand and so many different things that we can utilize. So for us, it really is more about being open and perceptive to a lot of these things. So giving a couple of examples, when we think about spiritual keys, it makes me think about the biblical story of Moses. When Moses goes to the burning bush, right? He sees the burning bush, and the burning bush tells him, stop, do not enter here, take your shoes off, cover your head, and then you can come in. And so he's so freaked out. He's like, what the hell is this? Bush is burning and it's talking to me. What's going on? So, of course, he goes and takes off his shoes, covers his head, and he goes in. Now, obviously, in modern Judaism, you find that they wear the kippah or the yarmulke on the head. And that is meant to remind practitioners that there is something higher than themselves, which is the divine. But the idea, too, if you think about the story, and I can't remember offhand who it was, the biblical story where they were moving the Ark of the Covenant and someone had tripped in the Ark kind of, and someone reached out and touched their hand on it to steady it, and the covering had come away, and they touched the actual object itself and not the covering, and of course they died from that, burst into flame or turned to ash. I can't remember exactly how the story goes. So the whole idea in Judaism is this idea that when you come, you have to be prepared, ritually prepared to interact in a spiritual setting. So you have to wear certain clothing, you have to cover your head, you have to do certain things. But those experiences are keys because you have to make the conscious thought that when you're going into a sacred space, you have to stop and say, hold up, I got to cover my head before I go in here because I'm coming into the presence of a spiritual being. That's one example. Another example makes me think of, in a lot of the stories about the Buddha, when the Buddha would be in almost in court, but when he would be lecturing and people would come up to him and people would address him, what they would do is they would step up to him and they would expose one of their shoulders. And by doing that, it was a way not only of showing reverence, but if you think of it, it could also act as a key, like I need to be on my best behavior because I'm coming to speak to a spiritual enlightened being. So we find a lot of keys sort of throughout the world. If you think in terms of Christianity, even if you look at Catholicism, that idea of using the holy water and crossing yourself before you enter into a sacred space, you're spiritually purifying yourself to go in, but it's also acting as a key. Again, letting you know, hey, listen, I'm shifting my consciousness from the profane to the sacred. So that is sort of the purpose of really what a key is. Now, in our purposes in Wicca, we understand a key not only is meant to sort of shift our consciousness, but it's also meant to put us in touch with the higher energies that exist. And we understand in our faith that work must be done on the astral plane. The astral plane and the physical plane are very close together, and so the astral plane affects the physical plane. So in order for us to work our magic, we have to go into a sort of light trance, shift our consciousness using keys, and then be able to manipulate the energy. I like to call it the sort of energy textures or the energy landscape of the astral plane that then in turn affects the physical plane, sort of as it trickles down. So we see that happen, but in order to do that, we have to use keys and shift our consciousness in that way. So what sort of things can we do to shift our consciousness? So as we're talking, I want you to think about some ways that you find it helpful to shift your consciousness when you're doing work. Now, this could be for purposes of magic. So when you're coming to perform magic and ritual, there are certain things that you may feel you need to do in order to shift your consciousness into that magical frame of mind. Those may be different from ones that you may feel you need to use to shift yourself to a spiritual frame of mind. So let me think about some of the ones that I do. So for me, when I am getting ready to do my prayers, normally that happens in the evening. When I get ready to do my prayers, what I do a lot of times is I will sit down at my altar. I will normally sprinkle the shrine and myself with holy water first. Then I will light the candles. And when I light the candles, I normally have some sort of affirmation that I say, something about, normally I'll say, in the beginning, the universe was full of chaos and void, and out of the chaos came forth the light of the God, which came and brought life to the universe. So I light the candle as sort of a remembrance of that time when we had that experience. So not so much the lighting of the candle, that's the key. It's the words that I speak that help to shift my focus from the profane to the sacred. And then after that, normally what I do is I have a bell, or in this case I have tingcha. So I have little, I don't know if you don't know what tingcha are, they're like little cymbals, and they hang on a string, and you hold the string and you kind of hit them together, and when you do, it makes a really nice sound. So I normally chime those 3 times as a sort of sign to myself and to the spirits that I'm starting my devotional practice. So I normally do that. Of course, I light incense as well as part of it. So for me, that's normally where I begin my practice in shifting that consciousness, from one to the other. So the thing about magical or spiritual keys is that they have to be different than what you would normally do. And a lot of times when we look back on history, we see that a lot of these spiritual things, or things that people felt were important or spiritual or had a significance to them, was because they were different in some way. They were unique in some way. So of course, if you look at how the ancients punctuated the wheel of the year, or even how we do today, they punctuate those specific times because they were different and unique. Each segment of the year was different, and they had a different way of honoring each time. So with that being said, it's special because it's different. And we can apply that to a lot of things. So when you think about what you may use as a spiritual or as a magical key, think about things that are a little bit different. So, for example, when we cast the magic circle, casting the magic circle itself can be a key for us because we don't go around circumambulating things on a normal basis. Now, there are some faiths that do that, where they, like for instance in Islam, where they go to the Kaaba and they circle around the Kaaba. But that's also special because they don't do that under normal circumstances, only when they would be visiting Mecca. So the same is true for us. When we cast the circle and we go around the space, we don't behave that way in normal life. So when we're doing that, not only are we making an intention to sort of create a boundary a spiritual boundary that we're going to be working within in a spiritual way, but we also are taking the time to create a moment where we can where we're acting as where it's acting as a key. So we're able to go through and cast the circle, and by doing that, we're saying, okay, now I'm starting something sacred, something spiritual. I need to get in tune. You could also say that clearing and releasing could also be a spiritual key. We take a moment to stop, relax, take that breath, come to a nice still place in our selves, and then we do that visualization where we're clearing and releasing that excess energy. We make an affirmation. That entire experience is a spiritual key. So for some people, sounds can be a spiritual key. It makes me think of Thich Nhat Hanh's book, The Miracle of Mindfulness, and he talks about one practice that could be used in your daily life. Excuse me. You choose a sound. It doesn't have to necessarily be a bell. It can be if you want it to be. You choose a sound, and when you choose that sound, you make the intention that when you hear that sound, whatever you're doing, you're going to stop, you're going to take a breath, you're going to come to the center, and you're going to be fully present for just a moment, and then you're going to continue on. So anytime you hear that sound, you kind of made that commitment to yourself. So those are spiritual keys. It's like, wait, stop, pause, let's get in the right frame of mind. So sounds a lot of times can be spiritual keys, whether it's a drum or a horn or a bell or a chime of some sort. Doing a physicalizing something in a different way can be a spiritual key for us as well. So if you are the type of person that likes to kneel or sit at your altar, that's fine. If you're the type of person that likes to bow to your altar, that also is fine. But that's something that's markedly different from how we in the West behave. We don't bow to people in the West. We don't bow at people or at things in the West. It's not acceptable. Even in mainstream religious practices, we don't necessarily bow. Now, prostrate is a little bit different, but, bowing at things or people, we just don't do that anymore. So to do that would certainly put us into a spiritual frame of mind. You may choose to wear a piece or an article of clothing or a piece of jewelry, or you may choose to do something different with your body. So maybe you wear a particular type of undergarment, or you wear a particular type of socks, or you wear your hair down, or you style it in a particular way that acts as a key and puts you into that spiritual frame of mind. When we talk in terms of from the magical side, because up to now I've mentioned mostly spiritual. When we talk in terms of the magical side, we have to understand that basically everything that we utilize in magic is a key, some form of a key, because technically speaking, we can do all of our magic internally. If you were a quadriplegic and you were bound to a bed, you could very easily perform magic with nothing but yourself, which is fine, which is great. Of course, humans aren't always like that. I mean, if you look back at history, you see that we like things and stuff, and we like pretty things, and we like a lot of stuff, and we like things to look and feel special and unique, and so we go ahead and take the time to craft things that we can use in our spiritual practice as a way to act as a key for us. So if we look at, say, something like an amulet or a talisman, when we're handling it or when we're creating it, we see by handling it and seeing it, we're putting ourselves into a spiritual frame of mind, and we're turning our direction toward that. If we are working with a sigil, or we're doing sigil magic, or we even already pre-made, pre-designed sigil like a rune or First thing that came to mind for me was like the peace prayer sigil that the Correllian Order of Peace Weavers uses. You know, it's a pre-designed sigil that we already have, and so if we're looking at that or we're utilizing that, that right there, by seeing it, we automatically think in our mind, okay, now I'm working on this, or now I'm working on that. When we talk about candle magic and we talk about the different colors and the different meanings of the different colors, we also realize that the magic is being done in here. So when we see the color red, what does the color red mean to me? Regardless what any books might say on it, what does the color red mean to you? Just earlier today I was watching a short video. I'm becoming more interested in Korean shamanism. I'm finding it really interesting, the whole process and the pageantry that comes along with it. So I follow this page on Facebook, and there was this lady who speaks English, and she was in this like storeroom, and she was showing people sort of what different things they use in their rituals. And it was like different products and things like that, and a lot of them were very unique to a particular, like, a spirit. So if it was like a certain type of ancestor or what have you, they would have a different color that they might use. And so they had this box, and they had all these different, I guess you could say, articles of clothing. They were like brocade, and they were very pretty. So I don't know if like the shaman puts them on when they're like channeling the spirit, or if it's something that I don't know exactly. But so they had them all in this box, and they had all these different colors. And the lady was saying, like, oh, you know, we use these colors for men, and these colors for women, and these colors for boys, and these colors for girls. And the interesting thing was, to me, that the colors did not match up with what my perception of colors for genders would be. So like there was like a teal, and there was like a pinkish color. They were like for boys, and then there was like, so I thought it was really interesting that there was you know, some colors that I, or we in the West, would consider to be feminine colors that were being attributed to male spirits. So I thought that was really interesting. So it really goes back, everything comes back to you. It has to. It has to. So what does the color red, in this example, mean to you? And how can you use it? So when you're working your magic and you're doing, for instance, candle magic, and you see the red candle, that red candle means something to you. That color is evoking something within you. And as it's evoking something within you, that is acting as a spiritual, magical key to say, oh, we're talking about this. We're working on that. We're working on passion or love or vitality or, you know, any number of things. So when we're talking about colors, or anything for that matter, we need to be very clear about what that key means to us. And so, you know, when we start the practice of magic, we have to get familiar with ourselves, and we have to get familiar with what it is that it means to us to be who we are. And when we start to learn about that and learn about ourselves, we start to see why these things matter and what importance they have to us. So I'm sure a lot of serious practitioners would agree with me that when it comes to things like dream dictionaries, although they might be a great jumping off point, they're not going to apply to everybody. You know, again, if, you know, going back to my example of Korean shamanism, say that you have a dream dictionary and you have a Korean exchange student, and she's like, oh, I had this dream about, you know, waking up in the forest and there was this giant snake and da-da-da, and you're like, oh my god, I hate snakes, so it's a bad omen. And in her culture, it may mean something completely different. So for her to look at the dream dictionary, which is understandably written for Western audiences, nothing in that's going to make sense to her because it's not in her culture. Now, as for us, looking through that book, it might be like, you know what, I do agree that peacocks mean wisdom or whatever, or owls mean wisdom, or, you know, otters mean family, or, you know, whatever that thing is, because we have this sort of understanding in our, you know, in our culture. So we have to really be aware of that too, in the cultural understandings that we need to have in order to be able to perform this magic, because we could look at any number of books and say, well, this book says that yellow means friendship. Well, I don't think that at all, so no. I think blue means friendship. Whatever. So without further ado about that, just be aware of these sort of things about yourself and how they relate to you. So when you're working on magical keys and you're working on these different things that you can use to shift your consciousness, realize that a lot of these tools that we use in magic are simply that. They're tools. They're meant to help shift our consciousness. They're meant to help focus what we're trying to do. And you could very well do without them. Now, if you asked me to do without them, I could in a pinch, but I certainly don't want to. I love ritual. I love the pageantry. I love the robes. I love the whole convention of it. So for you to say, well, you're gonna do healing, and you're gonna just sit over here in the corner and do this healing, whatever, that is not a challenge for me, but it's not my preference, because I very much like to be active in my spiritual practice. I like to be able to get up and stand at the altar and use my tools and do all of this versus sitting in the corner and essentially doing the same thing, but I'm doing it more internally and then going out with it. So think about that for yourself. What are some of the keys that you use to get yourself into a spiritual sort of frame of mind, or what sort of keys do you use that kind of put you into the mood, so to speak, that get you really vibing well enough to really be able to do the work that you're intending to do. You're welcome to like, post in the comments, kind of what you think it works for you. So I hope that this video was fun and you enjoyed it. Tried to be short and sweet, unlike most of my videos were super long. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. Until next time, signing off for now.